And good morning. As good as it can be. This is February 12th, 2020. Another episode of my critical thinking and analysis. We're starting off today talking about Covid-19, which is the official name now or the consensus name for the coronavirus that's circulating in China and the rest of the world. And so we'll just refer to it as Covid-19 from this point forward. We're going to discuss some of the elements about it as well as future impacts and so on. So we're now in day 71 of this because I'm counting from December 3rd. There's some suggestion in the media that the Chinese government was aware of potential cases as early as late October. But for certain, they knew in January, and the supposition is, because I can find references to it, that the earliest entrance of a person with the manifesting virus was in the early part of December. And I found references that went back to December 3rd, if I'm interpreting those correctly. But nonetheless, it'll be within that boundary level of the early part of December for the onset of the virus being unleashed on the planet. We're now in day 71, okay? So we've had our first 2 months, 60 days to grapple with this and make and have an appropriate reaction. And our appropriate reactions are less than stellar in their performance so far. So some of the things over on this other side here, you'll see a list of items for supplies, just to start thinking about this. For my way of thinking, that we're really in a situation of where the governments of the planet probably knew early in January, or were suspecting, or there were people within their intelligence organizations that were suspecting that we were dealing with an unleashed bioweapon. So I think that in early part of January, certainly the Chinese government knew. Certainly by their official reactions in January, as of January 15th, they were demonstrating that they were thinking of this as being atypical to any other normal pandemic, and I put normal in quotes. The reaction from the Chinese government from the initial point onward, in my opinion, has been as though somebody suspected and told everybody else to suspect an unleashed bioweapon. The flow of the virus through the population and through the social infrastructure, as manifested within the social infrastructure, indicates to me that it's more likely it's a bioweapon than not. As that is the case, we're now in a particular situation where it's impossible to quarantine Earth, or Earth is our ultimate quarantine. And so everybody on Earth has to consider that they will become exposed to and have to deal with the consequences of COVID-19 over these next 3 or 4 years. The concept of bioweapon being what we're dealing with takes a while to filter through government, and we're now in mid-February here on the 12th, and by the old 1960s, the idea was that if a bioweapon was used as part of an attack in this plan of mutually assured destruction, that it would take the opposing government approximately 100 days to understand that they were being attacked by a bioweapon. They may suspect it earlier, but by day 100 it would be certain, in the understanding in the manuals I read, that the opposing government, the target site, would know they'd been attacked by a bioweapon and would be reacting in that way that it was affecting them. This is assuming a sneak attack with a bioweapon, right? Like unsuspecting. And that's kind of, in a way, what we've got appearing in China. No one suspected China was under attack or that a bioweapon would show up. So if we count from December 3rd and we go out 100 days, then we can make some assumptions that by that day, most of the governments on the planet should be thinking of this as a bioweapon, and we should start seeing effects within their responses that grasp, that understanding of the situation that we're involved in. In other words, they'll start reacting as though it's a bioweapon. So basically, let's panic first. Let's get the jump on the governments. Let's panic first, okay? And let's treat this as though it's a bioweapon, and we need to be proactive in our thinking, not reactive, because governments are always reactive, and you see what happens in China, right? So it's already affecting travel and shipping now. There's official notices out by the U.S. government by way of the post office that they can't guarantee shipments to and from Asia. Well, real soon, a follow-on to that will be that anything coming from Asia might have to sit in a warehouse for who knows how long until somebody can figure out some way to pay for a way to make it safe. Okay, I'm going to bring this up later, but so we may get to the point where mail just bogs down because nobody's prepared to deal with it. The thing about the bioweapon stuff is that unlike a usual virus, say that we had a really nasty virus that was going to end up having potentially the same level of devastation as Covid19, but that it was naturally arising, it might take years to hopscotch around the planet just because of where it would arise by happenstance. And so we don't have that now because we're in a populous place, and we know that there's been at least 5 million people that have left Wuhan after the Wu province was exposed. So there's 5 million carriers out there because you can be asymptomatic and carry and be contagious. So anyway, so travel and shipping is already being affected. It's going to get worse. And so it would be prudent for anybody that's anticipating any kind of travel, especially in this next period, okay, the next 30 plus days until the governments understand that it's a bioweapon, or at least keep that knowledge to themselves and act as though it's a bioweapon, and start putting social controls at a serious, backed up by law enforcement and military way. All right. So I suspect that'll be forthcoming over these next 30 days, so that by the time we get into mid-March, we should be seeing reactions in the developed world that will include clamp down on materials out of Africa, out of Asia, and people moving to and from those areas. I suspect there will be some kind of an accommodation to try and keep travel more or less normal. I mean, they'll still be clamping down on it, and there will be a tendency on the part of people to not want to expose themselves. But I suspect that the governments will be a little bit hesitant in this initial period here until the end of April to totally ban travel from, various different continents by humans. Okay, they may do that to shipments fairly quick. That might be reasonable to expect within this next 30 days. But it'll take them that long or longer to come up with a plan that relates to moving of humans across the continents and so on. By the way, it looks like COVID-19 will be the end of immigration. No one will ever have to worry about mass immigration again. First off, there's going to be so many people that will die that population pressures will be reduced in these areas from which the immigration is occurring. Resources will then be able to be spread further around among the survivors. And countries simply won't allow it. You cross their border illegally, they'll shoot you on sight and bury you. Maybe they'll sample your body and say you had the virus so that they can justify shooting you. But they're going to get real paranoid. So that's where we're headed on this, because by the time we get into day 100 here over these next 30 days, and governments realize it's a bioweapon, at that point the world has changed. Because bioweapons don't behave in the normal course of events as do naturally occurring viruses. So a bioweapon can be expected to hang around for a number of years. much longer than a virus itself might expect to circulate, because we then build up all of the antibodies and we don't have to worry about it. Bioweapons don't necessarily allow you the opportunity to build up antibodies in a surviving population, except under the extremity of lots of that population dying out to the point where there's no longer a potential web of interconnections to allow the virus to spread. Okay, that's the goal of bioweapons, to kill enough people that the few survivors are essentially isolated. So if they've got it, they can't pass it on to anybody. They survive and they have the antibodies. At a 15% mortality rate, which is what was originally proposed, and an 83% infection rate based on the early numbers out of Wuhan, we're looking at a staggeringly huge part of the population of the earth that's going to perish as a result of this. This can be ameliorated. We can do a lot to cut down that number of people that die, okay, including ourselves, by taking proactive prophylactic measures and now starting to treat things as though we are in a biological crisis, as though we've been invaded by the Andromeda strain from space trying to kill everybody, right? If you treat it that way, there's no harm in being paranoid about it. You may come across a little bit nutty to the people around you, but if you survive and they don't, who gives a damn, right? So at this stage, some of the things that we know is that we're going to have systemic shutdowns in China that will affect the rest of the planet by the end of April. So this was the period of time where in that first chart I drew 2 videos back on this subject, the progression of the virus through the population over time. This is at that point in April that we're going to have this slight little from the governments saying, okay, we've got it controlled. We're all able to go back to work and stuff because we've shut down certain systems so the virus can't transmit. And so they'll let it go over April, maybe into May, and have a 60-day quarantine on some stuff. Even during that period of time, we'll still see new outbreaks. And then, because of internal pressures, we're going to get the same effect here that we'll see in China before that, and I'll get to it in a second, and things will be let loose, and then the virus is just going to super spread, okay, because it'll be summer, there'll be a lot of interpersonal contact, and people, even though they'll be out in the sun, getting more vitamin D and building up some natural resistance, it's going to be very deadly nonetheless, because this is a bioweapon, and that transmission layer, that transmission contact part of it, is going to bloom. Now, before this occurs here in the West, all right, so we'll go into some kind of travel lockdown, okay, some minor level of travel lockdown over the next 90 days. And then everybody at a government level will say, well, we're not seeing any real new numbers popping up, so everything's good and we'll let it go again. The reason they'll do that is the same reason that China is under pressure to do that right now. And that is that their economy is crumbling. Supply chains are crumbling. The just-in-time supply system is breaking down. They need to have people go back to work at a general level just in order to get key people back to work. You know, power plants, firefighters, all of these kind of guys, right? They need the infrastructure to support them getting into work. So China's under pressure to break the quarantines as soon as it may be possible to do so. Now, China has other internal political issues that will drive their government's response, and to some degree it may be predictable by intense China watchers and people that know the individual personalities in the CCP. But I'm not able to predict many of the things that will come out of China from this point forward, because they will be reacting to their own internal political paranoia about the Chinese Communist Party losing power over this. If anything's going to bring down that structure, that power structure, it will be a pandemic that is later becomes known to be a bioweapon released by their own governmental structure, whether through accident or deliberately is immaterial. The crowds, the people, won't stand for it. Further, if it turns out that some of the rumors, some of the conspiracy stuff is true, such as it was a combination of a Canadian biolab and a Wuhan biolab that came up with this virus, and that this virus is phenotypically focused on Asian skin types. I don't mean skin specifically, I mean Asian phenotypes within humans. If that's the case, then you can imagine that the Chinese people might be justifiably angered to the point of regime change, right? And so the Communist Party is extremely aware of this aspect of it, much more so than any of us here in the West, and is reacting to that already, and will react in ways that are not predictable by me, because I don't know the personalities that are involved in the Chinese Communist Party and who has power over what. But we'll see some really strange things come out, and it won't be because of the virus necessarily. It'll be because of what they need to do to have the appropriate perception within their own populace base to not lose power. So the world's entered into an entirely new phase of very dangerous times in ways that will actually end up precluding war. I don't think we're going to have to worry about a war at this stage, but there's some small amount here where we're getting hints that radical elements within the, at least the linguistics purveyors of the Chinese government are stepping over certain lines that don't augur well, and that is they seem to be blaming the West for the virus. Now, that indeed might be justified if it was a Canadian biolab that came up with a key component to this, or it was engineered out of the people in England, the Pilbright Institute kind of guys, then indeed Chinese people would have every right to be pissed at us for our participation in there. But we still have to acknowledge it didn't erupt in Canada. It didn't erupt in London. It's erupted in Wuhan and at a lab that the Chinese government military runs. And so, anyway, so a couple of things. The COVID-19, from the reports that are out there now, it's going to be extremely difficult to engineer a vaccine for. The reason this is because the attempts so far on similar coronaviruses have resulted in vaccines that trigger the very same condition that the COVID virus triggers, which is the cytokine storm, the basically drowning in your own immune response to everything, a mucus storm, if you will, right? Okay, so because of that in my mind makes it even more imperative, because of assuming it's a bioweapon and assuming that these reports are correct about the similar coronaviruses and the problems in engineering effective vaccines there, so from my perspective, you can't believe anything the government is going to say in hopeful language about a vaccine. Okay, so if government is saying to you right now, whether it's a Chinese government or an American government, it doesn't make any difference. If they realize at this stage here, within these 100 days, and they say down in here somewhere that a vaccine, and they will be pessimistic, and they'll be pessimistic for a good reason within their own minds, but they may come out and say 5 months. Because that's what they'll be told by biolabs, okay, and big pharma. And because the big pharma could ramp up production after a 5-month period of time, all right? So it's not 5 months to engineer to come up with a solution where it leads to an injection in your skin and you get supposed immunity. In this case, we don't have that sort of a timeline available to us, because it'll take some period of time for big pharma to ramp up to make enough vaccine for the planet, all right? Years, 3-5 years perhaps, for that kind of production to be created. On top of that, we've got a real problem with this potential for a vaccine, and that is that this vaccine testing period will have to be extensive because so far, similar coronaviruses have failed to have an effective vaccine for even animals in many cases. Because the vaccines themselves must go to the same nature. And basically what happens is, in order to induce an antibody into your system, you have to have some form of that critter in there to trigger this response to build the antibody. But in triggering this response, you go into a cytokine storm and you die. Because they flood your system with this, and it's something that's so unknown, your body says, I got to get rid of this real quick, and it freaks out on everything. Plus, the way this stuff is supposed to act, it's supposed to kill you by triggering your immune system going crazy. So it's extremely difficult to engineer a vaccine for this. So in my way of thinking, I'm not... now, I wouldn't take a vaccine anyway because of the crap they put in there. So let me be clear about that. I'm paranoid. They put in shit in vaccines I don't trust. They'll never tell me what's in there, so I won't take them. Okay? I haven't taken a flu vaccine. I haven't taken any vaccine since I stopped being a military brat. Okay? So the nature of a vaccine in this case will be such that it will be years before they are able to say they've got something that is effective, all right? Because they're going to get into where they may indeed come up in 5 months with their first candidate. And candidate number 1 here might take 2 years to crap out. It might take them 2 years to figure out that they can't make a vaccine out of this supposed antibody-inducing chunk of the virus. And they'll have to start over. Now, there'll be other labs trying other approaches and so on, but nonetheless, the nature of a bioweapon is such that it is difficult to engineer a vaccine around it. Specifically because of the way in which these kind of bioweapons, triggering your own immune response to kill you, work. So, in my way of thinking, I'm not looking at a vaccine and a big pharma or a government solution that's going to, to fix this or fix me. And what I'm assuming I'm going to have to do in order to survive is to remain as antiviral, as viral proof as I possibly can with vitamins, chaga mushrooms, and so on. So real quick, since I don't want to lose the thought on this, I want to try and keep these things down to 30 minutes or less, because it looks like we'll be doing a lot of them. Let's quickly go through supplies that you're going to need here, okay? And so always at the very top of my list is to have enough vitamin C, enough vitamin B, and so on to get me through. I also want to point out chaga mushroom so far seems to be the only thing that anybody has had any hope at a supplemental level of suggesting will work. Don't rely on colloidal silver. It's not going to do any good, and if you take enough of it, it'll cause you issues with liver and veins and so on. And colloidal silver is contact. If you've got the virus circulating in your blood, you're not going to get colloidal silver in your blood, so it'll never kill the virus in your blood, so there's no point in dosing yourself with it. Now, you're going to need masks. We'll get to that in a second. Those masks should include some form of eye protection because it's become quite clear that the Chinese government believes that that's a primary source of infection, okay? That not only breathing it, but also getting contact on the wet surface of the eye. And there's a lot of stuff in the Chinese literature so far about wet surfaces. So you're going to need masks with eye protection. You're going to need bleach at your house to bleach down surfaces. If you're going to be doing bleach, you better have gloves because bleach will crack your skin, making it susceptible to virus entry, all right? In my way of thinking, some of these things down here make a lot of sense. Get duct tape for sealing up windows because if you're in a city, we may have to take the same kind of approach that China is. And that appears to be effective gassing with bleaching agents in a 20-foot high column. They're figuring 6 meters, 18 feet, right, more or less, that's 20 feet, of air. So what they're trying to do is to kill all the virus in the lower 20 feet of the air. And so they've got trucks with big blowers putting out this disinfectant. They've got drones trying to get it from above, trying to get the surfaces on the outsides of buildings. So if that's the case, and it starts getting that way in a general sense in cities and so on, you're going to need duct tape to seal up your windows so that you don't get the bleach intrusion, so you don't get to start breathing the chlorine dioxide, because that's bad for you anyway. You're going to need your own thermometers for monitoring your temperature, but get the kind that read without touching any surfaces. There's two reasons for this. It prevents you from having a fever and transferring it to someone else, or vice versa, right? Plus, these are the kind of machines that the military will be using, because no one's going to want to touch your ass if they see you walking out in the street and they have to decide whether to deal with you or not. So if you're monitoring your own temperature with something that's far more sensitive than what they've got, you may inadvertently report your temperature to them higher than they will find it, and so they'll think that you've got a fever, right? Or had one recently. So you need to have the same kind of gear. Now, I'm saying also get blood pressure wrist things, right? And know your blood pressure in a healthy way, because that appears to be one of the key signs for differentiating between COVID-19 and a regular flu. The regular flu, you get some level of blood pressure rising, but with COVID-19, the reports are that you get blood pressure rising in a lot of people because they don't monitor their blood pressure. The first signs they get of it, they get very weak in the legs and their thighs kind of give out. And that's why you see the people collapsing in the street. And then they go into the other aspects of this, which is the hyper breathing, trying to get rid of the fluids, the cytokine storms, and so on. But it's not the fever per se that's causing them to collapse in the street. It is actually being reported that it is this blood pressure flush where it just starts rising and rising and rising. And oddly enough, high blood pressure, you get very weak. So you may want to use that as if you knew your regular blood pressure walking around, and then you knew your blood pressure when you had the sniffles and that kind of thing, then you would be able to say, oh, hey, my blood pressure is good. I just have the sniffles and stuff. No need for me to go to a hospital and expose myself to coronavirus, right? And then you're going to need to get batteries to operate these guys and all your other gear. So get batteries. Then I think you need to actually have medical tape for the kind that you can put on your skin and leave on there for a long time. You know, that it's medical tape, right? And I would advise getting it 1.5 inches to 2 inches wide. And the reason that I think that you might need this is because at some point, no matter how many masks you get, you may find in a situation where someone's over at your house or whatever, and you've got to provide them with a mask, or you need to craft something that will have to stay on the skin. And so I'm going to bring up this idea that we used here when St. Helens blew. And that was, we didn't have enough masks. We needed to go through an area where there was potentially going to be a lot of the ash, and we didn't want to breathe it. What we did was to make these pop bottle masks, to take the 2-liter pop bottles and slice them off where the handle part is up there, where you pour it from, slice it off in an oval such that it fits around your face here, and you sort of shove your face into the bottle, and if you have tape around the edges, you can tape it to your face, you can put a little string on it and keep it on your face, and you have eye protection built in. You're looking through a distorted surface, so bear in mind, it's difficult to drive, especially if there's ash in the air from like volcanoes and crap, but it was difficult to drive because the surface is distorting, but it works, and you don't get the dust in the eyes. And what you do is you cut out the bottom of the pop bottle, the 2-liter pop bottle, with a lip in it, and then you put paper in the form of, we did this for particulates, but you put paper in the bottom, like paper towels and even toilet paper, whatever, that you're breathing through. And so that would work. And you could even, on these kind of things, you could even spray bleach on a piece of paper, put it on the outside, clean it and everything so that you've got a sterile surface, and then put paper on the outside of it and tape it there. So you'd have 2 layers of barriers. Paper that's set down on the inside, taped in place, and then paper on the outside for a little sandwich. So you can make emergency kind of things. These are also would be good for dogs. We made masks for our dogs at the time so they could go outside without breathing in the ash from St. Helens. And we did it with the big pop bottles, and it fits dog snouts real well. Kind of hard to tape it on the fur, so you have to shave some of it, but it works. Okay, so then you're going to need your regular first aid supplies, because bear in mind that the further we get into this period in time here, the more you are going to want to avoid going to urgent care facilities and hospitals and doctors any possible way you can, and delay it until you just need just a little bit, get in and get it out, because of the exposure to the coronavirus. Because bear in mind that as here we are on February 12th, but by the time we get to March 12th, we will have had a number of governments realize this is a bioweapon. They're going to say, holy crud, what are we going to do? And, like government of Mexico, government of Guatemala, Canada, there's going to be different reactions all over the place based on where you are. So, for instance, Canada, you have a lot of population centers that are spread out. This is not really all that good because there's not a lot of population in between. So if they got really hit hard in their population centers, their culture, the Canadian social order, might really suffer a larger level of disruption than maybe Guatemala, where everybody's living more rural, right? Even though there might be the same level of exposure and damage and people dying and so on in both cases, it's going to depend on our local arrangements, how we have our social order as to how we're going to get through all of this stuff. But I'm expecting that by the time we get into the end of April, we'll have systemic shutdowns. Okay, and we'll know we're going to have systemic shutdowns, at least here in the West, at least if you watch TV and that sort of thing, because you'll see some period, something in here. So say sometime in March, you'll start seeing spring and summer ads disappear. No travel ads. They'll start ratcheting back on that right away because they don't want to ramp up demand. We're already seeing things hit the travel industry. We're already hearing about the IPO for Airbnb being impacted by the coronavirus. We know that the mail systems around the planet are already shutting down as a result of this. Now, this was something I was going to bring up. It dawns on me that I know how to deal with my own mail, right? I've got stuff coming from China, Russia, all around the planet all the time. So what I'm going to do is take it and with gloves, put it into a bag and clamp that plastic bag and induce chlorine dioxide in there and gas it. And so it'll be fine. I don't get live animals or anything, so nothing's gonna be damaged by this. But it occurs to me that will become a business response to this. I'm pretty certain that maybe by the end of summer, say by June or July, we'll start hearing about contracts here in the USA being let by the USA government for fumigation of packages, for customs, for the military, for post office, as a first line of defense. So there will be people that will form businesses. Maybe they'll get shipping containers and you'll just run everything into a shipping container, seal it up, and you got vents on the top and everything, and you just gas everything inside the shipping container for X number of hours with chlorine dioxide to kill all potential viruses and pressurize it so it gets into all of this stuff. Then they'd have to have another shipping container where they could allow it to air out, and then another shipping container where they would allow it to air out for that second time, and then it could go on. Presumably would be safe at that stage. We know that this is coming here in the U.S., some kind of response like that, because the Chinese Communist Party just gave themselves, and they'll be the first government to start doing these kind of things, they just gave themselves the right to seize property, private property, which was a big deal to them to let happen way the hell back when Mao liberalized the whole social order and allowed capitalism in, which is what boosted China up out of dire poverty. And so what the Chinese government has done is gone against something that has been a long-standing point of pride with them, that the Chinese government, the Communist Party, has never had to seize en masse private property once it had been granted. And so they were justifiably pleased with their situation. Well, they've just given themselves the right to go and grab property for the purpose of dealing with the infection. Okay, so that was of coronavirus, and that was fairly specific. And then I noticed the first thing that pops up in the literature is their suggestions that the Communist Party is going to be applying that first to ports. Because they don't want to be reinfected by stuff being sent back to them, okay, or new stuff coming into them. Once it's out and about everywhere, they don't want to be battling an infection in Wuhan and then have it start coming back into them on goods that were refused and sent back to Wuhan, and thus have to go through their own ports again, or people coming through or whatever, because they now face an outside exposure risk just like every other government. So I think that'll come to the U.S. Now, I think U.S. will just approach it and do it in contracts and be somewhat open about it, saying, hey, we need to deal with this. Let's get practical. Let's set up, XYZ contracting arrangement to get these things to occur, the leasing of facilities, the ability to handle chlorine dioxide, get people trained, all of this kind of thing. And so I think that'll come by about day 100, which should be about between mid and end of March, right? Now, we're on a different calendar here. Our government can legitimately probably claim that they didn't even know about the virus until January. So their 100-day marker may start then. But at some point, it's going to dawn on all of the governments that this is or should be thought of as a bioweapon and treated accordingly. If you're planning any kind of activities in here, bear in mind the governments may get to the point where, as a result of getting this realization, they may say, no more travel. Boom! Bring the hammer down. Okay, that's the expectation in the paradigm modeling done in the 60s by the writers of these books on bioweapons that I read for textbooks. The expectation is that once the government realized that they would then go full, complete, batshit crazy on everything because they didn't want a social liability of being seen to be lax in protecting their own citizens. And that's just the problem that China has right now. China desperately needs to shut down the whole country for maybe 5 months because we don't know how long it'll take for this virus to naturally wane and die off without being refed, right? Their suggestion is it's on surfaces for 28 days if the surfaces are moist enough. So if that's the case, then 5 months is not atypical, not unreasonable. But China also desperately needs to get everybody back to work today and reopen the country and say, hey, everybody can come and, travel and trade and all of that. And so, which one of those two things are going to win? I don't know. Now, at some point, if the world as a whole realizes that we're dealing with a bioweapon, then if China does, as I said in the original, or in the one with the graph and the projection of the bioweapon through time, if it follows that model, it will, at some point around here, say they've got everything under control and they'll open it all up and they'll breathe a sigh of relief, because for them, it will have been from February through the end of April that has been a serious shutdown, but really from January through the end of April that had been a generalized shutdown in specific areas. And so they'll really be feeling the pressure at the end of April. And so they'll make nice. They'll say their numbers are going down, everything's good, and then they'll open up and let everybody do business, and then the rest of the world just really gets hit hard. Now, at that point, blame goes back, okay? Because at that point, the other governments would realize that China fucked up, right? Not China, but the Communist Party fucked up. Should they do that? And so there would be recriminations depending on how bad it is. China may become so weak as a result of social breakdown and population death as a result of this, and may become socially unstable because of the anger of their own people at being treated this way by their own government, being sacrificed, that the Chinese government has other worries. not only revolution from within, but they don't have enough resources or manpower or willingness on the part of that manpower to cooperate with them to defend themselves against their perceived external enemies. And so China at that point is going to become extremely unstable. That would be somewhat predictable. We're seeing early signs of that. There are reports out of riots in I don't know how people that are affected with this virus could efficiently or effectively riot, but of riots, disruptions, upheavals in barracks of military police that have been quarantined. So the military police and the military are in China are seriously affected. And the horror of this is that if this part is true, if October-November part is true, and it was actually really developing and coming out then, had been released sometime then, there were all of these military conferences in Wuhan over that period of time, especially for the Chinese Navy. And now what do we hear? The Chinese Navy is shutting down submarine exercises, shutting down planned big military exercises that are somewhat imminent. So they're feeling the effects already, and they're calling back all kinds of usual patrols, let's say. And it's because they're getting into the rumors are they're getting into cruise ship-like conditions with infections and the inability to manage the stuff on boats. Here's the thing about ships that people don't recognize. The U.S. Navy did a study. They did a study for it was a long one. I mean, it was like 18 years or so. And they came to the conclusion that a couple of things are absolute facts. Any activity done on the water is 35% more likely to result in an accident just because you're on a moving platform out in the water. And they determined that there's three kinds of motion on a boat. If you get two of those kinds of motion, you're going to get 80% of your crews to suffer debilitating seasickness, and it can come on them over a course of 24 hours. And that if you get 80% of your crew on a boat to have this seasickness, you can get to the point where the boat can't function. If all your people in the engines are not working and they can't stand up and stuff. So it becomes really key to have fit people, because you're always being marginalized as an effective force while you're on the water because of all that motion, right? And so imagine having a crew filled with people sick with coronavirus. Your performance is just going to drop right through the toilet in 24 to 48 hours. And that's just if even a marginal proportion of the crew is sick, because you don't have, it's not like you can carry twice as many people as you need, right? You'd have to carry twice as many supplies, have twice as many toilets, etc. And navies and stuff are just cost effective to some extent, and they don't do that. So the rumors are that the Chinese regular Navy, as well as their submarine groups, are suffering some serious issues as a result of this. How long will that be before it affects militaries around the planet? Probably not very long at all. So I think we're actually at this realization criteria. I'll break this off in a minute and we'll get done. I think that over the next 30 days, we're at this point, and we will know how bad it will be by what happens from April on. Do we go into a lockdown that China declares is done at the end of April because of desperate need, or do we keep locked down and deal with things as a sensible society and start reorganizing ourselves explicitly, openly, and discuss why we need to do these things as we go forward? In other words, are we going to be adults, or are they going to lapse back into personas and pretense? So I'm doing all of my regular stuff: vitamins, chaga mushroom, exercise, exposure to sun, all of these kind of things, trying to keep myself and everybody around me as fit as I can through this, just so that we don't add to or participate in the rest of the problems. And I suspect that a lot of us are going to get to that same kind of a conclusion, that first and foremost, I have to watch out for myself, especially as a male, because it's my job to watch out for everybody else. So there we go, guys. That's a list. These things will be you can't get masks already in China, so they'll fade fairly quick once the supplies run out, because a lot of them are made in China and we're just warehoused here. And so we might not be able to get any of this material past this date here, which is why I bring it up. Not to incite sales, not to make everybody panic and buy a bunch of shit, but in my opinion, we're dealing with a very serious situation. I think it's a bioweapon. If it is in even a regular kind of a flu, none of this stuff here would hurt you to have, unlike some of the other things that people are saying to do. So, best to us all, guys, with respect, and I'll end up doing another one of these, I'm sadly certain.